Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Right Here, Right Queer. I'm Tess Carletta, and I am here with my very dear friend and writing colleague, Alana. Hi, Alana!
Hi!
Today, we're going to be talking about fanfiction. And the reason I brought Alana on to talk with me today is because Alana is someone that I met through writing fanfiction, and we have remained friends for the last 10 years. So you're going to be getting a look into our fanfiction friendship and also our process, I think is probably what's going to happen. So Alana, tell me what fanfiction actually is for those of us who may not know.
Fanfiction is essentially independent writers or fans consuming a piece of media that's out in the world, like a published book or a TV show or a movie, and adapting those characters and some of those plot points for their own purposes. I feel like that's the most simple way to put it, although I do enjoy telling people that Dante's Inferno is fanfiction and,
Of the Bible?
the Bible. Yeah.
Oh my god.
And the Aeneid is fanfiction, so, it's a lot older than I think people realize.
For sure. If this is like a new and revolutionary concept for you, you can find fanfiction on any number of platforms, but right now the most popular one is Archive of Our Own, and I don't know if people still use fanfiction.net, but I do think it's worth mentioning the kind of fun little history behind both of those websites real quick. So fanfiction.net was like the place to find fanfiction, and a group of individuals got together and they were like, fanfiction.net is too limiting because they have a lot of strict rules about what people can and can't post, and if you have a lot of eclectic tastes, then you couldn't always write about what you wanted to on fanfiction.net, among other things. And so these people got together and they created Archive of Our Own, which is very much like the most uncensored collection of media maybe anywhere. And part of that is because they have a filtering system where you can filter out the things that you definitely don't want to see. Like if there's certain things that trigger you, you can make sure that you don't see them. And in return, they are a nonprofit that allow anyone to write literally anything. So that's kind of an important context for this conversation as well. Just to keep in mind that nowadays people are writing so many things.
Yeah.
For good and for evil.
I agree. The line is starting to get blurred.
When was the first time you ever encountered or wrote fanfiction?
The first time I encountered fanfiction, I think, was Lord of the Rings fanfic, and I think it was...
Oh my god.
Sam Frodo fic. I'm like 99% sure, and it was like with a friend of mine when we were in like middle school. And I remember us reading and laughing about it. And then for whatever reason, I don't remember being involved with it or reading it or doing anything with it until I started looking up fanfiction for Angel the series, which was the spin-off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the younger listeners. But yeah, so like my first experience with it was The Lord of the Rings when the movies were out and everything. And then I really started getting into it. It was for Angel.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was probably around the same age. Okay, so I have a weird beginning with fanfiction because I did not know what it was. I just created it not knowing that that was actually a thing that I could do. So I was on DeviantArt, and if you like my books and you're trying to find this fanfiction, I just got rid of it off of the face of the internet like a year or two ago, very recently. And I was 12, and I was writing Percy and Annabeth stories from the Percy Jackson series, and there wasn't even a category for fanfiction on DeviantArt, so I was categorizing it as literature.
Oh my god.
Fiction. And they were like 200-word chapters, but there were like 40 of them, and they were really bad. So I deleted them, and that's the passion that I had for writing really bad Percy and Annabeth stories was profound and deep.
I think every weird piece of fan fiction you write is profound and deep in its own way.
I think that might be true now. I don't think that was the case when I was 12.
No, I think it was, because you were feeling real things. You were feeling real, deranged 12-year-old feelings.
That's so true. So, Alana, what would you say the value of fanfiction is?
I still think there's value to it. And I think in recent years, with the rise of book talk and fanfiction going a little more mainstream. I've seen some cons to it, but I still think there absolutely is value to engaging with art that already exists in the world and developing your own stories, and whether it inspires you to write your own stuff or you're just writing generally, I think it's good for that, and I think it inspires critical thinking because you're thinking about the thing you're consuming. And also it's just really fun. There's a lot of worth in just admitting that something is fun and you have fun, and that's fine.
One of the values for me is just community and like finding people that you can vibe with, like writing fan fiction and encouraging the collaborative process, or even just like, hey, I really think you're cool, you're my friend and I wrote you a story, is a good way to like foster meaningful friendships even if they are online.
Yeah, that's true too. I like that it's collaborative. You would try and find people who liked your writing style and whose writing style you also enjoyed, and so that was really interesting to be able to find. But I also think there were times where it felt like a very like personal thing where you were writing fan fiction and you're like, no one's gonna read this, and 99% of the time no one did read it, and it's just up there on the internet and no one is reading it, but it still gave you some kind of satisfaction to know that you had written it and that you fixed something that you felt had been broken.
That's another interesting thing too, is like, I've seen a lot of people get really hard on themselves about the success of their fanfiction, and it's so dependent on the state of your fandom and like the time. Right now, I'm in the Buck and Eddie fandom for the show 911, and they were the top couple on AO3 last year. And you can tell because a story that like is written by a random person posting on a Tuesday will get like 2,000 kudos in 4 hours, which is crazy considering like when I was in the Anne of Green Gables fandom, that's like approximately how many kudos my one fic has, and that was considered to be a large amount and like super popular for the fandom. And I happened to be writing when Anne with an E was out, and that was another thing too. But like, if I tried to write fan fiction for what I'm really in the mood for right now, which is like, I just finished Howl's Moving Castle. If I wrote a Howl and Sophie story based solely on their book characters, I don't think anyone would read it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you noticed some cons with fanfiction. So what do you think some of the trouble is with fanfiction?
I think for me personally, one of the issues with it was for a long time it was kind of a crutch to not work on my own writing. It was just so much easier to use someone else's characters and have this backstory already written. But it was a mixed bag because it was like, okay, well, at least I'm writing something. But I feel like it might have slowed me down in terms of starting my own things. But I also think that, like, because fan fiction can kind of give you an immediate reaction from readers in a way that, like, if you're working on a novel, like, I've been writing 2 different novels over the course of many years now, and it's like, obviously, I can't get the kind of feedback writing those when they're not done that I could get for posting fan fiction. So it can be really hard to continue on with your work without getting that feedback. But in a way, I think that can be bad, because if you enjoy writing and it's important to you, I feel like you need to be able to do it regardless of knowing that you're going to get attention and you're going to get feedback. Like, it needs to be important to you and mean something to you personally. Or it's like, I don't really see the point unless the point is just, you know, to churn out whatever's popular so you can make money.
Right. Just in the various fandoms that I've been in, over the course of my life, I noticed that, like, a lot of people will start to rely on the attention that they get. And so, like, if a fic doesn't do as well because there's a hiatus or something, or the fic just isn't as enticing to readers, like, they'll go on social media and they'll be like, they'll have just a whole big thing about, I can't believe that I'm not getting as much feedback. And it's like, no, you're losing the heart of fan fiction, which is writing for yourself. And if someone else seems to also like the premise that you've got going on and finds joy in that, well, that's great. But I don't know. It's not like actual publishing where you have to make money. Like, the stakes are very low. But to some people, they're very high. So I guess it's just doing whatever I guess is best for your mental state. But don't drive yourself nuts over fanfiction.
Well, too little too late for that.
Really?
I think there is a very common fallacy you see nowadays, which is that just because something is popular and it has a lot of readers doesn't necessarily mean it's good, and good is obviously a very subjective word. But there were plenty of, I remember, like, I would read fan fiction that it was written so terribly, just no complete sentences, like, just just horrible dialogue and it would be 10 times more popular than anything I'd ever written. It makes you feel a little bummed out because you're like, but I think that's a really common thing even with books that are published. Like, just because you can get a lot of eyes on something doesn't necessarily mean anything. And it also means that, like, not every single person on earth is going to be in your audience, and they're not all going to be, like, you know, picking up what you're putting down, which is fine. Like, you kind of have to become comfortable with that. You're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. That would be insane if that were true.
Right, and I think that there's, you know, a time and a place for those stories. Like, those stories I find are usually attractive to people who are just getting back into reading, and so they don't want to parse through a really complicated metaphor. They just want to whisk away into a story, and they don't mind if it's a little shoddy in its construction. But then eventually, as they grow, they might look for something different. And honestly, as someone who wrote horrific, like capital H horrific fan fiction, in terms of just all the things you just mentioned of like bad dialogue, I'm really thankful for the people that were like, oh my gosh, you're just God's gift to fan fiction, because it motivated me to keep writing, and now I can actually write well, I think. And that's because I was given a space and the opportunity to be a bad writer. And I think that's something that a lot of people who don't write fan fiction, they don't always get that opportunity to be bad writers. They want to be good right away.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's probably one of fanfiction's greatest values, is what you just said, which is like having the opportunity to be bad at something. Because it's just such a, I mean, it used to be less of a competitive space, and I feel like now we're kind of getting into the mainstreamness of fanfiction and the people publishing fanfiction, and I'm like, I'm not so sure that's a good thing. There are so many fanfics that I've read that I've been like, oh, this is better than some like original novels I've read. But I think part of the reason they're good is because they are pulling from something else. And so that's not a guarantee that your new story is going to be just as powerful as the fanfiction was.
No, I get it. It's complicated because I think it's not a black and white issue. I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm going to plug Cal from the 911 fandom. He is Daisy's and Briar's on AO3. And if you ever want to have your mind like fucked and thrown into a blender and kissed tenderly on the forehead and you like 911, I would start with his fics because they are just astoundingly beautiful. And I asked him recently, I was like, are you ever planning on publishing your own stuff? And he was like, that's the dream. And as a self-published author, I'm so happy to hear that that's the dream, but also on the other hand, I'm like, you can make it happen. Right now you can put something on Amazon and publish it and I will give you money for it. It's not easy, but it can be easy. And but I think that there are some people, like you said, who are just, they write so much fan fiction, because I think Cal wrote like over 1 million words or something on AO3 last year. Like, it was insane how much he wrote. And I'm so thankful to read all of his stuff for free, and I hope one day I can throw all of my money at him and read his original stories.
Yeah, I remember being super prolific when I was writing fan fiction, and then when I'm trying to work on my own stuff, it's like so much harder. I think part of that is just the pressure, and like we were saying, not everything is everyone's cup of tea, but at least with fanfiction, you're like, the odds are good that some other weirdo will like this, and I'll have one other person who's interested in reading it. Whereas I feel like sometimes when you're writing original stuff, you're like, well, this is not in the world at all. There's no way for me to know if people are going to read this. And the pressure is just so much greater than when you're writing fan fiction. But it's just, I wish there was some way I could replicate the way I was writing fan fiction to how I'm working on my own stuff, because I think I would get a lot more down.
I know. Some of the reviews for Kit and Basie have said, this read like a really good fan fiction, and I'm like, oh, dang it! Like, on one hand, like, great, I'm glad that that's one of the reasons you like the book, but on the other hand, I'm like, I tried so hard to not sound like I came right off of AO3, even though that's exactly what I did. So you mentioned people turning fanfiction into real published stories. How do you feel about that?
I'm still working out how I feel about it.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think there's a worthwhileness to not everything being consumable and or purchased. And I think there's a worthwhileness to things being more insular, the way that fanfiction was. And I remember being afraid to talk to people about fanfiction, like in public.
Yeah.
And I remember I met a friend of mine, Linda, whose book is actually coming out January 21st.
Woo!
And we had worked together, and I remember we got lunch, and we just started talking, and I was like, do you read Like, it was like, it's like, do you read fan fiction? And they were like,
Do you?
yes, do you? And we started talking, and it was like the first time I had ever had like a conversation in person with someone who I hadn't met online about fan fiction, and it was great. But I don't know about, like, I don't like hearing about it on TV, and I don't like hearing about it out of the mouths of people who weren't little internet gremlins. You know what I mean? Like, there's something like makes me feel uncomfortable when it's someone who wasn't like in the trenches.
And I think part of it too is that a lot of the expectation or stereotype thinking about fanfiction is that it's just like lonely people staying up late to read really smutty, awful things, and they're hopeless and they have no lives. And one thing that being in a very popular fandom has shown me is that there are so many different people who are writing fanfiction, people of all different walks of life and with different hobbies and different areas all around the world. There was like a thing we did in the fandom where the actor who plays Buck in 911 posted a thirst trap, so everyone posted their own thirst traps, and I got to see some of the faces behind the fics that I really like, and I was like, these people got riz, they got game. I'm like, and they like show their like rooms and like, you know, the trips that they've been on and all these different things about them, and I'm like, the 911 fandom writer people are popping off a little bit. And so I think maybe, just to bring it full circle, that being hesitant to talk about fanfiction with people you don't know who have written it could just be like, they're not going to get it, but maybe they will.
How old are the people writing in the 911 fandom right now, do you think? Like, what's the age group?
I'll admit, it's a very horny fandom. So it's a lot of people who are over 18.
Okay.
I've seen gay men who are like 50. Yeah, so there's all sorts of different people. Mostly I think they're around my age, like mid-20s to mid-30s.
Because I remember being, like, when we started reading and writing fan fiction, we were like, you know, preteen age, probably.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if more people are starting to read it as older folks. Then, even though kids are online more now, like, they're on TikTok and Instagram and stuff. So I should clarify by saying I'm 34. So I'm a millennial. When we went online when I was preteen, we didn't have all the social media stuff. It was like LiveJournal and message boards and stuff. And so there was less to do. And so we were getting involved with fan fiction and stuff like that earlier. Because even like Tumblr is not, I feel like, as popular as it was when we started using it. So like, I'm curious how it changes the experience of fan fiction if people are coming to it later in life than when they were younger.
I think it probably leads to better quality fanfiction. I've noticed that of like, if the fandom is mostly comprised of adults, then the fanfiction is great. But to your point, I would say to not underestimate the power of Stan Twitter, which, if you don't know, is just another word for like a fandom existing on Twitter. And I think that the range of fanfiction readers has probably expanded and included a lot more regular people that aren't just chronically online or aren't like super duper duper fandom oriented.
Yeah.
I will say though that my top book of 2024 was fanfiction published as an original work. It rocked my world. It was The Scottish Boy by Alex de Campi. Now, when I read it, I didn't know it was fanfiction. I read it, and it's this big, chunky book about 1300s England and Scotland, and this English guy needs a squire, so they capture this kind of rabid Scottish boy, and they end up falling in love and having many dramatic things and many passionate love moments. And it was so good. And then after all of that, I discovered that it was a Stucky fanfiction. So it was Steve and Bucky from the Marvel world. And I'm glad I didn't know that reading it the first time, because that would have made me feel a certain way about it. But it was so good. It was so beautifully written. I can see why a million people on AO3 would have eaten it up. So I think there's potential, and certainly some pairings get a lot of attention from a published standpoint, like the Reylo fans get a lot of books. Someone made an Instagram post of all of them, and there were like 40 of them just on that post alone, Reylo-inspired books.
But it was so funny. Let me just tell you, so I'm a Reylo fan, so, you know, come for me, whatever. But I read a lot of Reylo fanfic, and I knew that some of them were getting published into books, and I was like, I have no desire to read this as an original work, because I was like, the story is interesting because I already know who the characters are and I know what Adam Driver looks like, and that's my thing. Like, that's kind of the big draw for me. And like the writing was good and the dialogue was great and everything, but like the plot of the story, I was like, I don't need to read this as like an original work. Like the whole draw for me was that it was iterations of those characters. So, like, I agree with you that there can be potential, especially for those fan fictions that are, like, super intense in terms of, like, world building and all this stuff, and you can really see that, like, it's ready to take off. But there's some that I'm just like, I don't know if this needed to be its own thing. But you're nicer than I am, so.
Yeah, I don't know. And there's probably... well, there's probably someone out there who felt the way that I did about The Scottish Boy, like, about those stories in the Reylo world. Like, I liked The Love Hypothesis just fine. I bought that at Walmart and gave it a read and thought, boy, I'm glad I'm not a STEM girly, but that was fun. I don't know.
I feel like it's important context. I almost wonder if we should have mentioned this earlier on. The context of this conversation is that I have a master's degree in English, so I'm kind of an asshole, I guess. Or I'm a little, I guess my experience of writing and literature and reading and stuff is just a little bit different than if I hadn't had that experience, let's say.
You're allowed to be picky. Like, you don't... I think that this is something that new people in the fandom space are struggling with. That not every fanfiction is gonna be good, and that you can literally just acknowledge that it's not good and move on with your life. Someone, once again, a 911 Twitter, who was making comments about fanfiction, like, oh, did you see that fic going around where such and such thing happened? Like, I can't believe that that author was so stupid that they put this in their work. And I was like, me, the fanfiction police, rolling up. I'm like, wee you, cut that shit out. No more. And it pissed me off so bad. I'm like, people are writing this stuff for free, and you're going to be an asshole about it online. If it's not your cup of tea, if you don't agree with the characterization, you can literally just move on with your life, which is all of what you've done every time you haven't liked a fic as long as I've known you.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever, in my entire life of reading fanfiction, I don't think I've ever left, like, a nasty comment on anything.
Because why would you?
Because, like, if I didn't like something, I just didn't read it. There was a lot, too, that you can usually tell from, like, the first couple lines if it's something you think you're gonna like. And so, like, there were plenty that I would just start, and I was like, nope, and I would just X out. And then that was done. And then I would go look for something else. I never felt the need to, like, unless someone asked me, this is, like, its own conversation, because we experienced this a lot in the Once Upon a Time fandom. It's like, if you're asking for feedback and you only want accolades, it was such, like, a weird thing where people would be like, read my writing and review it, but only say nice things about it. And I would have to start telling people, like, just don't ask me. I'm not the person that can do this for you. Like, this isn't, like, don't ask me.
Go ask Tessa instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Would you ever publish any of your fanfiction?
I don't think so. There was, like, one that I wrote for Once Upon a Time where people had said, oh, this could be its own thing, but I never really felt the urge to do so. Yeah, like, everything was so connected to the original work that it's weird. It's like, I want the connection to the subject matter to be independent. I don't know if that sounds crazy, but, like, I don't think I would be able to separate myself from, like, the fandom experience. And, like, when I was writing the fanfiction, like, I genuinely was thinking of those characters. Like, I'm thinking of their faces and their backstories, and, like, it wouldn't feel right to me to just replace them with new ones. The one time I remember I maybe had thought about it was when I did the Captain Swan Big Bang, and I did, like, the Tech Witch Emma and stuff, and, like, the world building I did for that was really fun.
Oh, yeah.
But it was still, like, I was still very connected to who they were as characters in that show and how we had come to know them in that show. And so I don't think I would be able to really disconnect enough to make it its own thing.
That's fair. So when I was in the Captain Swan fandom, I really felt like I hit the fanfiction jackpot because I stumbled upon an article about a woman who was a professional cuddler who you would pay her to...
Oh, yes!
Yeah. You would pay her to hold you and you'd get that physical attention if that was something that you didn't have in your life. And I, like, went to her website and read all about, like, boundaries and making sure that it wasn't sexual and making sure that no one disrespected her boundaries or violated her trust or anything. But I did write a Captain Swan story about that. And at the time, it seemed like people ate that shit up.
Wait, was it Captain Swan or was it Captain Charming?
So it was Captain Swan originally, which is Hook and Emma from Once Upon a Time. But then for one of your Christmas presents one year, we did, like, a Secret Santa, and I was your Secret Santa. And I wrote actually, this is kind of fun. It was my very first queer story because it was the first time I ever wrote about two men.
You're welcome, everyone. You're welcome.
And it was Captain Hook and Emma's dad. It was Emma's dad, Prince Charming. And I think Killian was the cuddler and Prince Charming was the huggy. But I wouldn't mind doing like a little like novella to just kind of like have fun with that trope. Although it's a little bit like, I don't like writing about people falling in love in a professional setting where that's not the vibe. But how can you not fall in love when you're in the arms of a beautiful man? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's asking a lot of someone.
Beyond that, there was one story I wrote for the Anne of Green Gables fandom where Anne was like a school teacher and Gilbert was this wealthy guy who wanted to, or no, he had the school. He was a wealthy guy, he had a school, and Anne saved his life. It was a retelling of Once on This Island, which is a retelling of The Little Mermaid, the original story. And that is like the only fanfiction that I wrote that I feel like has enough of its own world building for me to adapt it. I certainly wouldn't just copy and paste it right off the AO3 because I'm a lot better of a writer now, but so I don't know. Look out for those stories from us eventually.
Wait, Tessa, when you mentioned that was like your first queer story, it reminded me that I still have the screenshot from the Discord in 2017 and your comment when you messaged me and you said, oh, when you said Captain Charming, you meant Captain Charming, but Captain Charming is in italics because italics means gay, apparently.
I don't know who the heck I was thinking. Like, I don't know if I thought it was another term for, like, Emma, because technically she's a charming, but you know what? Sometimes you're 18 and you don't know that you're on the asexuality spectrum and then that makes you queer. Sometimes we discover these things.
Honestly, I thought that my Captain Charming fics were so much better than my Captain Swan fics. Like, I don't know why. I gravitated so much more. Like, I liked Captain Swan a lot, but when I started writing them as, like, this was like where it almost got closer to original fiction because there's like very little in the show other than the fact that they interact and they're handsome. There was nothing really to indicate that there could possibly be a relationship between the two of them. So that was probably like my closest foray into doing stuff originally because they kind of became their own characters for me, I think.
I'm gonna say something possibly controversial, but this is a queer podcast, so I think this is a safe space to say it. I think sometimes queer stories are more compelling. I won't be elaborating on that. Thank you. Good night.
And I did a lot of exploring the idea of loving the person instead of the gender, kind of was when I really started thinking about that. And I think that was like, it was like they loved each other for like these inner beings of whoever they were. And so that was like why I enjoyed writing that so much, because it almost like didn't matter. But I was like, these two personalities need to be together regardless. I mean, it's very fun that they're both nice to look at, but regardless.
I do think it's very bisexual of you to ship Killian with both Emma and David. I think that's very bisexual of you.
I agree. Those are good. I really loved writing in that fandom though. Like that show is so bad, but
it's so
I made so many good friends and
Kitten Basie has one fanfiction on AO3.
That's the dream.
I know. It's by someone that I know personally, but she had written it. And she sent it to me. She was like, do you want to read my Kitten Basie fanfiction? I'm like, fuck yeah, I want to. Oh my god, are you crazy? Like, yeah, I want to read it.
That's so cute. Yeah, for any of my original stuff, that's like a dream for me, is if someone wrote fanfiction about it. It would make me so happy.
To close this off, I'm gonna promote this little story. It's called Model Session by JCT. It's in the Kitten Basie fandom on AO3. It's got 7 kudos, so get over there and give it a little love. But that's 7 kudos. Ooh, give it more kudos.
Give it more kudos.
And if our listeners want to find out what you're working on, where can they find you?
So I have a writing Instagram that I swear to God I will start using more frequently, but it's Alana Rose Writes, and my personal Instagram is Starlessness, and I kind of post on both of those, but Alana Rose Writes is the one where all the writing stuff is. The book I'm working on right now is very heavily related to Elvis, and so if that's going to be a problem for people, then don't need to follow me, and you don't need to read it. I didn't read. You wrote so much Anne of Green Gables fic, Tessa.
I think when Sebastian first found my AO3, he said, wow, you're a prolific writer. And I was like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? And he was like, no, you've written So many works. If you would like to try out Alana's writing, you can pick up Patchwork, and in the back section where there are bonus stories, the very first one is called Soldier Boys, and it is a Kit Elliott story that Alana wrote about Kit's first love in a World War II setting, and it's heartbreaking. It's fucking devastating. So, there's that.
That's kind of fan fiction. I kind of wrote fan fiction for your book.
Yeah, that's actually very relevant, but I paid you to do it.
You did. Thank you.
And then, if you want to find me, as always, you can find me as Tess.Carletta on Instagram or at tesscarletta.com. Anything else, Alana, before we free our masses to go off and read all their stories on AO3?
I outed Tessa, so if you want to go find my fan fiction, it's Strange Tales on Archive of Our Own. And my fandom list is extensive, and it's Once Upon a Time, Sons of Anarchy, Teen Wolf, Star Wars,
Supernatural,
The Punisher, Ted Lasso, Good Omens, Our Flag Means Death, Queen of the South, and The 100. It's a diverse group.
Oh my god.
But there might be something in there for you.
Go off now to read fanfiction without shame. Goodbye.